Right, we're going to talk about comparison and parroting in preaching, or another way to say this is finding your own voice. Preachers, especially young preachers, are often tempted to mimic their favorite preacher or preachers, and they know that preaching is serious business, and often because of lack of confidence, they're tempted to copy a successful model. Or they may be tempted because we are in a very competitive environment today, being in the tech age where comparisons abound. And you know, people are watching other preachers during the week and listening to them, and we can feel a great bit of pressure to sort of keep up or and then to copy the style of those that are quote unquote successful. I've watched aspiring preachers for several years now, and as I watch them preach, sometimes I'm like, oh, they must like John Piper or they must like Matt Chandler because their hand motions and so on looks very, very similar. And it's important to have good models, but it's also important to find your own voice. And this is because God has called you to preach with your particular personality, with your particular gifts, in a particular time in history, to a particular people. God has not called you to be a third-rate version of someone else who preaches in a different context than you, who has different gifts than you, who has a different personality than you. And so let me give you 6 things to consider as we think about that. How can you find your own voice in preaching? First of all, preach out of the overflow of your heart, and that is a heart captivated by Jesus. So to find your own voice, we need to get over ourselves and never get over the wonder of Jesus. Our desire for approval or praise from others must constantly be put to death, and our desire for Christ and His glory must constantly be stoked. Because we speak most authentically when our hearts are adoring Jesus passionately. You know this from experience. You speak authentically about something that you love to talk about. You're not thinking about mimicking someone else when you're speaking about something that you really, really care about. You're speaking about your favorite sports team. You have your own voice as you're talking about them. Or you talk to a friend who loves to travel and you say, hey, tell me about your trip to Europe. And off they go. And they're not thinking about their rhetoric. They're thinking about the subject. And as they do, then what is coming across is their authentic voice. You bring up the debate whether MJ or LeBron is better. And you find a passionate individual just getting immersed in the subject, in the content. And they're no longer thinking about how they sound. So that's the first thing that I would say is to be captivated by Jesus. Be captivated by the content of what you're talking about and communicate that authentically from your real self. Worship your way through the text as you're teaching the text to other people. I often say that good exposition, good preaching is not just theological and it's not just methodological, it's also affectional. That it has to arise out of our hearts. And so with that in mind, all of life is sermon prep. We speak out of an overflow of our whole life. And so preach out of an overflow of a heart captivated by Jesus, and then you can sound like yourself. Okay. Secondly, experience the richness of life. Now this relates to number 1, but it's a bit different. Psalm 104, other texts speak a lot about the beauty of creation. God has placed us in an amazing world. Even though it's a fallen world, James tells us every good and perfect gift comes down from our Father. Paul tells us that God has provided everything for us to richly enjoy, to live with a thankful heart as we receive God's gifts. Ecclesiastes tells us to enjoy our work, our toil, our food, our spouse. And the enjoyment of God's common grace brings a richness to our lives that will have an impact in our preaching in a number of ways. One is just good for our souls to enjoy beauty, food, film, recreation, friendship. These things there's always a danger that these things could become idols, but we are not Gnostics where we think everything in creation, everything that's matter is evil. We're not monks just to be secluded from everybody and then suddenly just appear behind a pulpit. We're made to enjoy life to God's glory. Because as Kuyper used to say, there's not a square inch in the whole universe where Jesus could not say, mine. Paul says, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. And so it's important that we have some hobbies. It's important that we have interests. It's important that we have a good rhythm of work, rest, and play. That's good for our souls. But it's also very important as we think about finding your own voice, because this will help you relate to your people who are living in God's world themselves all week long. As you observe life in creation, you can pick up good illustrations. You can make good application as people are dealing with life in your same context. And as you enjoy the richness of life, then it encourages your soul. It helps you to connect with people in illustration and application. And it will help you not sound like someone else, because not everyone lives where you live. Not everyone has the same interests that you have. Not everyone likes soccer. Not everyone likes hunting. There's a uniqueness to your life, and there's a uniqueness to where you live and what you like to do. And so it's important, I think, that we enjoy the richness of life so that we can experience life in God's world, connect with people in a real way, and then we won't be mimicking other people who enjoy things that we don't enjoy and are talking to people that we're not talking to. Okay, thirdly, work at heightening your personality in preaching, not changing it. Brian Chappell said this, and it's always stuck with me. He says, "Congregations ask no more and expect no less of a preacher than truth expressed in a manner consistent with the personality of the preacher and reflective of the import of the message. The heightening, not the changing, of your normal speech is the most natural and effective way to communicate important matters." So what we're talking about is important, therefore it should be a bit more intensity, but not the complete changing of our personality. And so there's a lot of freedom that I find in that you can be yourself, but be passionate about what you're talking about. God uses different personalities. Just look at the prophets. The prophets are quite different from one another. Fourthly, have some good mentors and have some good models. Get some good feedback on your sermons, both before you preach and after you preach. A lot of people just say feedback for after they preach. But I think it's important that people look at your material before you preach, not just to make sure you're saying some good things, but if they're affirming what you've prepared, that will give you confidence as you then go up to preach. And then you won't feel this pressure to perform. You'll know ahead of time, hey, what I've got here is some good stuff. The other elders, the other pastors, the other staff members have weighed in on this. I'm feeling good about my material, and you just get up and deliver it. I would encourage you to have a variety of models. Don't just listen to one individual. Have a variety of models, and then that way, I think with exposure to a bunch of people, you're less likely to clone yourself after one particular person. Couple more. Fifth, preach a lot. It's just going to take a long time for you to find your voice. Just be at ease with that. Keller said one time, no matter what you do, your first 200 sermons will be terrible. So be encouraged. If you're from 1 to 200, you've got some time. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration, but the point's well taken. It's going to take a lot of reps for you to really be comfortable and find your own rhythm, your own style. Much of my style and delivery came out of the world of youth ministry and youth camps and trying to keep uninterested teenagers interested in expository preaching. And the point is, it takes a lot of time. Don't get discouraged. This is really hard work. It's also very weird work in many ways. There's a reason people don't like public speaking, and some of you are being called to do that the rest of your life. Luther used to say, be ready to accept patiently the fact that nothing is seen more quickly in preachers than their faults. Whereas one guy quipped, preaching is like dying naked a little at a time and knowing that you have to do it again next week. So welcome to the pulpit. Sixthly, preach in the language of your time and in your specific context. If we start sounding like Spurgeon, that's going to sound weird. God's called you to your context and your time in history. Keep your language understandable. Think about your old self as you prepare. When you were a new believer, make your language understandable, explain terminology. Be out and about talking to people. Those who never talk to people end up sounding alien in the pulpit. Spend time with unbelievers, spend some time counseling, allow these conversations to impact the way you begin to write your sermons for the listener and not the reader. So hopefully these considerations will help you find your voice as you do the wonderful work of preaching God's Word through your personality in your context.